think about yourself as a representative for this issue. You don't want it to look like to be vegan is just to be disconnected from the rest of what's happening in the world. But when we talk about effective altruism and what will have the greatest impact, it's hard to see how anything could have a greater impact than television. When I ask people why they went vegan, the answer is almost always a documentary. So I'm new to the movement, but not to media. My career has been spent in mainstream media, mostly based in New York City. Until recently, I'm now in LA, working at the Daily Beast and Bustle. And after I went vegan, I started writing about it because it's the largest women's website, and I wanted to use that platform of over 40 million readers a month to talk about veganism. And I saw that when I did, this content was performing very well. People were clicking on it, sharing it. Vegans reliably shared it, but also other people. And equally importantly, people were Googling questions about veganism and things related to it. Questions like, why is meat bad for you? Why is milk bad for you? And articles I'd written were becoming the first result because Bustle has so many readers that I was able to write those articles and have them be ranked highly by Google, which I'll explain soon. So I wanted to create more of that content. I saw that it was doing very well, that people wanted it, but I didn't have enough time, so I left for-profit media to work for Mercy for Animals, and they were hiring a lead writer at the time, mostly to do organizational writing for them, and maybe, pitching some of our investigations or corporate campaigns. But I proposed a new approach, which was that they should let me do some of that, but also just talk more broadly about veganism and basically support me in writing articles about veganism, even when it didn't directly benefit the organization or promote the organization, that it benefited our mission statement. And so they were open to this, and it started working. I started writing many of these articles for different websites, articles that might seem a little frivolous in title, but are things that people are searching, questions about how do vegans get protein, how does it affect your health? Also more, theoretical articles talking about the connection between feminism and veganism, trying to hit this from every angle I can. Ghost writing for Teen Vogue or Green Business on behalf of an undercover investigator telling her story, talking about clean meat startups. So any kind of article that we could place, looking at where is it going to get the most traffic and where is it going to be most effective. So we've, built tons of relationships with editors, reporters across the country by using this approach of not always directly advocating our organization, but instead a message of veganism. And this ends up benefiting the organization in the end because we do a few things. We're able to call upon those relationships when we have an investigation that might be a little bit of a harder sell to an editor to place. They already know who we are. And it's really working. So by building these relationships and working more as a freelancer in a way, we've been able to place dozens and dozens of articles and investigations. Okay, but before I talk about strategies for pitching editors and also the next frontier I see in entertainment media and how our movement can break in there, I want to just zoom out a little bit and talk about what I think we need to be addressing more as a movement when it comes to thinking about how we message veganism specifically, I'm talking about. So I think that we all know veganism has a pretty big image problem worldwide. There's a reputation that it is only elitist and white, and looking around this room, this is not as diverse of a room as I would like to see representative of the entire world. And we're not going to change this as a movement until we invest real, actual resources in changing our hiring practices and making our movement more diverse. I would suggest checking out the work of a new nonprofit that's just launched in the United States called Encompass, and her work is to exactly help animal rights nonprofits build more diverse organizations. But there's also a great role for communications teams to play, and for each of us to play when it comes to how we message and thinking about whose voices as a movement are we committed to lifting up. So I think we need to spend more deliberate time getting vegans and people who are just sympathetic but not yet vegan on TV, writing articles and opinion pieces, and sharing our message who do not fit the stereotypical mold of people's image of what a vegan looks like. Ideally, this would be activists and social media influencers on Instagram or YouTube who already have large followings, of which there are many, who are already talking about veganism from a human rights perspective, from a food justice perspective, from a public health, environmental, immigrant rights, rural and workers' rights perspective. There are so many different ways this issue intersects with other social justice movements that we really will not be successful until we learn to align ourselves with all of them and lift up voices of everyone talking about this issue, even if they're only talking about it at first in terms of reduction. This may also mean investing in ghostwriters at our organizations where we have funds to do that, to help produce editorials for people who might not have the time or writing experience to pen these op-eds or articles themselves, really dedicating actual resources to lifting up their voices. Or it might mean in any content we produce ourselves, thinking about who are we profiling in videos, in articles. This is an example of Mercy for Animals has done a great job of this. We did a video, just one of many examples of Chef Babette. She's extremely charismatic. She's in her late 60s and looks great. The camera loves her. We profile her in her restaurant. This content did extremely well, and this is not always who people think of when they think of your typical vegan. And videos like this get picked up by mainstream websites. So thinking about who are we spending resources profiling. I also think, as a relative newcomer to this movement, that we need to think more deliberately about how to frame veganism always as a broader social justice issue, by building coalitions with environmental and human rights groups and putting these intersectional arguments at the forefront of our messaging. We can no longer afford to look tone deaf and disconnected from other movements on our social media feeds, whether it be our personal ones or our organization's feeds. When we are only tweeting about animal rights or veganism, we are turning off a whole group of people who think to be vegan means that you have to only care about this issue and be disconnected from other social justice issues. I've been impressed spending the last week in Berlin to see that there are many more activists talking about this, talking about the environment. But I know in the United States, I'm even guilty of this despite working hard to combat it. It's very hard. The algorithms on social media make it so you share 1 or 2 vegan things and they will just suggest more and more vegan things and you get more and more trapped in your ideological bubble. So we all need to be making a deliberate effort to click on articles about other issues that are aligned with ours, to share them even when they have nothing to do with veganism, so that we as a movement don't signify being disconnected and isolationist, but instead people who are representing a global, nonviolent movement, a vote in the direction of slowing climate change and undermining exploitative systems around the world wherever they exist. Veganism has the opportunity to represent a concrete protest vote that people can make every day against the logic that might makes right, against the apocalyptic direction, the fascist direction that so many people feel this world is going, something people can feel good about that has more significance than carrying a reusable water bottle ever could. And it should be an essential part of symbolizing your progressivism. So how do we do this? We frame veganism as a way of addressing the root of the problem. I think Dr. Will Tuttle in his World Peace Diet is really onto something with his argument when he talks about veganism as a way of saying time's up to believing that might makes right, that those who have historically have power should have dominion over the earth and marginalized populations, whether they be non-human animals or human animal bodies. That means veganism must be cruelty-free, feminist, anti-racist, and we should try not to promote products that are unethically manufactured by human animals and be wary of promoting ones that harm the environment as well. We also need to recognize that not everyone will be motivated by protecting animals at first when they are blocked vegetarians. I was one of these people. I'm on this stage only 3.5 years later. For my life, I was a progressive, I was a feminist, I considered myself an environmentalist, but I didn't consider myself an animal person. And so I didn't think I had the right to adopt the label of veganism or vegetarianism, take it on as my issue, because no one had presented it to me as a key intersectional issue, a key symbol of my progressivism. And so we need to ask ourselves with every argument and messaging we make, why would someone care about this story or this argument if they don't yet think they care about animals? If they're what Carol Adams calls a blocked vegetarian, how can we frame this argument so that it promotes something they're going to be interested in? And this is going to be different for everyone and for every outlet. For some, it might be the health and vanity angle is a perfect place to start. For some, it might be identifying the immigrant rights issues that come along with this. Whatever it may be, we need to start there. There are so many self-interested human rights angles we can come at this with that we can't afford to only make an animal rights argument at first. People will open up to that once the cognitive dissonance is removed and they begin making a change. Okay, so how do we do this? I'm going to get more into specific tips now. First, for print media. Okay, so the first thing to know about print and web media when we're talking about articles is that editors are very, very stressed. They, have very little time. They're inundated every day with, I at Bustle got hundreds of emails, and that was not even the pitches, and everyone wanted something from me. And I had to say no and no and no to terrible things that I didn't want to say no to. So if you're ever emailing an editor or reporter, know that this is the situation they're in. They're under an incredible amount of pressure to get as many clicks as possible to their articles, to keep up with an insane world and news cycle. And we have another block, which is that they're likely not vegan or vegetarian themselves, and so they're looking at an email from us or a request from us saying, oh my God, I can't even with these people. Do they see how the world is falling apart and really this is what they're talking about? And so we have twice the hurdle to overcome. At the same time, there's a growing understanding that this content performs well because vegans reliably share it. And you can all do your part every day to do this on Twitter and Facebook, checking the hashtag vegan, following people like me and others who are regularly writing about this issue and resharing their content, primarily, ideally from your organization's Facebook wherever possible, because that's going to have the largest impact on traffic, the largest, wherever you have the most followers sharing that content. Also, more and more editors recognize that this is an issue that is not just about animals, that is about health, environment, human rights, and so they're growing more open to this. Another key thing to understand in how things are driven by traffic is that many editors are looking at what are people Googling. This is called long-tail search strategy, SEO strategy, and we would all do well to familiarize ourselves with it, and we should be the ones behind answering this question factually. Factually is very important in a well-sourced way, wherever possible. So we have a list, thanks to Stephen Rook of my organization, Mercy for Animals, of the top vegan searches. It might be different in your country, but we should be pitching articles, writing content for mainstream websites that address these questions ourselves. We should also look at sites like Quantcast and Alexa, they're called, that rank the highest traffic sites. You can see that Bustle, where I used to work, this is an old screenshot, but is usually in around the top 40 on the internet in the United States, period, in terms of traffic. So you might not have heard of it, but you know, that's going to be a very high impact to get an article placed there. And the more traffic a website has, the higher Google will rank it in search, usually. So prioritizing those outlets, even if they're not as prestigious, are going to make articles we're behind come up higher. Okay, so if you do have a PR or communications team and you're looking to employ this strategy, the first thing I would also prioritize and emphasize is media relations. So you don't want to try to just jump into media relations or pitching if you don't have any experience or any examples of articles you've written. But once you start, you can start with the lowest hanging fruit and pitch places that are easier to get published, or places where you might already know someone who's been published who can introduce you. Everything is about relationships and breaking through, becoming a face instead of one of many hundreds of emails. So you can prioritize asking editors and reporters who've shown a sympathy to veganism or vegan issues first, asking them out to lunch. Flattery can go a long way. A lot of editors are frustrated writers, so reading what they've written recently, complimenting them on it, if it's sincere. Everything must be sincere. These people are paid to be bullshit detectors, so you want to not come across insincere, and remember that anytime you are making an overture, you're representing veganism itself. Part of what you're doing is just giving them a good feeling about vegans, putting this issue on our radar. When we ask people out to lunch or try to become that face, it's important to not have a direct thing you're asking them for immediately. You're simply approaching them saying, you know, I love what you're doing, especially if it's someone who has maybe written something already about something around this issue, even if it's very small. And I just want to know, or my organization just wants to know, how can we support you in creating more of this work? And that's going to look like something different for everyone. For some, it might just be help with research. When I was at Bustle, PETA came to me asking this question, and I said, well, I have this whole list of things I know people are searching, but I only have one day to write a week. I don't have time to do all the research. So they helped me research factually, give me fact sheets on, producing articles like reasons meat is bad for the environment, for your health, etc., so that I was able to write them more quickly. So we might try doing that. We might write the articles ourselves. There's going to be a different approach of what everyone needs is going to be different. Also, okay, this is an example of a pitch. Again, the etiquette is different probably in every culture and country, but I try to keep it as short and to the point as possible, asking, why is this newsworthy right now? Why would this editor care about it? Why does it make sense for their website as something that their readers would care about, even if they don't care about veganism at all? I think also it means prioritizing a vegan message, again, ahead of your organization's message, and that means getting, or ahead of your organization's name, I should say. And that means getting creative. So I've done some things that appear very light, of, you know, essential vegan restaurants in New York City or vegan food hacks, but that perform very well. And I'm able to, in these articles, say, I asked my friends at Mercy for Animals, linking back at the organization, professional vegans, for their top recommendations. So thinking of more when we're trying to get our organization's names out there, almost in terms of product placement, the way you might have a brand on television. It doesn't need to all be about the organization in order to promote it. Okay, I want to quickly talk about opportunities I see in entertainment media. This is something I've been giving a lot of thought to in the last couple months, and which I think might be the next frontier of where we, in this movement, in communications, need to turn our attention. So while this approach I'm talking about online media is very important and it is working, when we talk about effective altruism and what will have the greatest impact, it's hard to see how anything could have a greater impact than television. The average American watches 37 hours of TV each week. That's like a second full-time job, and many of your countries are not far off. When I ask people why they went vegan, the answer is almost always a documentary. And so when we think about what will have the highest impact, obviously it's not going to be possible for us to always produce a documentary ourselves or develop a project ourselves. That's incredibly expensive and time intensive. But I do think we need to think about how can we support more of these projects getting developed in the first place. How can we get veganism on television as something that's normalized more and more? Okay, so, you know, you all get this reference probably because we've all seen this movie or know about this movie. That's an example of how one movie can become cultural shorthand much more effectively than probably any one article can. I think that there are a few ways we can do this, just to get into it very quickly. I think we could identify vegan talent that already exists in our countries or locally on Instagram and YouTube, people with large followings who represent a face of veganism that we want to be lifting up. This is an example of someone I would be turning my attention to. His name is Dominic Thompson. He already has a large following. He's a good-looking man of color who talks about this from a fitness and social justice angle, who became radicalized in prison in solitary confinement as a vegan. That's a perspective that I, as a white woman, cannot write about. But he is positioned to talk about and frame the argument that way. So thinking, how can we lift up his voice? How can we help create video content for him that then potentially I can pitch to producers and say, hey, we have this guy Dominic, would you like to have him on your TV show, daytime talk show, to talk about vegan fitness tips or whatever we think is going to be the easiest sell, and getting him out there more, thinking about how can we act as almost sort of agents for people who should be more famous in this movement but aren't yet. Here's an example of another woman I would do that with, who talks about it from a fitness and mostly health perspective. We could pitch reality TV shows, daytime TV shows, things like vegan cooking segments. I know that Germany has had some luck with this, so if you have had any luck or have connections that already exist, please talk to me about it afterwards. You can also follow me at Rachel Krantz, because this is something I would really like to see us break into and prioritize as a movement. We also might want to think about defining our audience of who are we trying to reach even more narrowly. This is a vegan YouTuber who's a teenager. You know, statistically, teenage girls are the most likely to change their behavior to go vegan, so perhaps we decide it makes the most sense to target them. Or perhaps we decide we're gonna prioritize targeting teens and mothers because they're likely to change behavior and are buying the groceries in many countries. Or we want to really zero in on investors who might be investing in clean meat or plant-based companies. Whatever it is, thinking about audience deliberately is key. Basically, I see no shortage of opportunities when it comes to mainstreaming our message or interest that editors, reporters, producers have in covering more of this issue. It's just a matter of where we're gonna prioritize our resources. So the first thing everyone can do as a takeaway, like I've talked about, is always share vegan content wherever possible, especially when it's coming from a mainstream outlet. That is going to help positively reinforce for these editors and reporters, even if it's not 100% perfect, that the vegan community always shares this. It always has a ripple effect. They get the traffic they want, and it creates a feedback loop where they will produce more of it. Check the hashtag vegan every day and share stories from it. But also, like I talked about, don't just tweet or share stories about veganism or animal rights. Think about yourself as a representative for this issue, and that you don't want it to look like to be vegan is just to be disconnected from the rest of what's happening in the world. Fight against being in that bubble and engage with other issues. Even when there's no immediate benefit to veganism, it will benefit in the long run. Those with more robust teams at their organizations might also prioritize sharing their contacts or resources or training smaller organizations in how to successfully do PR. We need to all be working together, the communications teams globally, on messaging and on sharing intelligence much more than we are. I see people in corporate campaigns doing this effectively in coalition building, but so far communications teams, at least in the United States, are not talking together as much as they should. So we at MFA are going to be working together to try to create some sort of listserv where we can communicate as teams together more, where we can call on each other to share particularly important stories and collaborate more. So please follow and contact me at Rachel Krantz. That's my Twitter and my Instagram. That's my work email. Like I said, this is actually very important. And that goes for everyone here, everyone who's presenting. You should share your handle too. I think we are not so into being self-promotional because it feels selfish, but this is actually very important. The larger platform we have, the more legitimate we appear. And so this is to be prioritized at all times. Reach out to me for any advice about this. And remember that we are trying to play a long game here. We're talking about shifting culture. And that is not something that happens so quickly. But we're laying the groundwork, I believe, so that when a major shift comes, be that global environmental catastrophe or hopefully first clean meat coming to market, that people are already familiar with veganism and vegan food and how to live as a vegan, why this is something that they should be doing more and more for their health, for the environment, that they're ready for that change. And so we're really laying the groundwork. That means normalizing our message and culture every day through sharing it more and more and that no approach, so long as it promotes this message, is really incorrect. There are so many different ways we can talk about it that we should be talking about all of them. And again, prioritizing this movement as a global intersectional movement of just one thread of what it means to be a progressive person in the world today, that veganism is an essential component of that, but not the only component of that. So thank you very much. Hi, I hope you enjoyed my talk at the International Animal Rights Conference. Please comment below and let me know how you think we can help mainstream our message. And follow me at Rachel Krantz. Thanks.